Hello my beautiful watchers and welcome back to Lost in Adaptation. This is a review show focused on comparing film adaptations of books to said books to see if the creators carried over the original plot and themes with any degree of loyalty or accuracy. Today we're going to be talking about the film your mildly annoying film studies friend keeps insisting that you have to watch, but you probably haven't. High Fidelity and the novel of the same name. The book, published in 1995, is the third novel by best-selling British author Nick Hornby, a writer who started his career as a freelance journalist and music critic before moving on to fiction writing in the early 90s. The film rights were procured quite quickly, but the intended film went through a few years of the dreaded development hell, passed around by different writers and directors until a final product finally saw the light of day in the year 2000. Interestingly, both the book and the film were quite popular upon release, but it seems neither has withstood the test of time particularly well. Despite the film's financial success, positive critical reception, high Rotten Tomatoes score, and a spot on Empire magazine's 500 Greatest Movies of All Time poll, its following these days could be considered cult at best. So I suppose a little background information is needed to make sure we're all on the same page. Summarized to the extreme, High Fidelity is the story of Rob Fleming, a 35-year-old British record store owner going through the emotional turmoil of being left by Laura, his partner of the last few years. The book is narrated in the first person by Rob, and I was given the distinct impression that he is a decidedly unreliable narrator, mainly because Rob is an awful person. He's just terrible. He's an absolute wanker. He's a deeply misogynistic, emotionally stunted man-child with a perpetual victim complex and a 100% genuine inability to tell the difference between having a taste in music and a personality. Now, in my personal literary experience, when a protagonist is this awful, it's usually indicative of one of two things. Either they're being set up for a lot of character development and redemption, or the author is utterly unaware of the fact that they've written this person to be terrible. You can usually tell which it is by how they're treated within the story. As examples, Alex DeLarge of A Clockwork Orange, famous for being one of the most unapologetically evil people in fiction, has the absolute crap beaten out of him throughout and starts on the road to becoming a better person at the end, even if that was omitted by the Stanley Kubrick film, showing the author was well aware that he was a monster. And on the other hand, we have the co-star of the bane of my existence novels, Christian Grey of 50 Shades of, whose deeply abusive behaviour is either not treated as such, excused, or completely unaddressed at the end of the trilogy, proving that E.L. Snow Queen Ice Dragon James recognized none of his worst behavior as problematic. It's hard to say which of these scenarios applies in the case of High Fidelity. The ending does involve some personal growth from Rob, but it's like the barest minimum bottom of the barrel stuff, so anything nice that happens to him feels unearned and borderline like he's just being rewarded for being a mega ass all the way through. I don't want to lean too hard into unprovable assumptions here, but other novels written by Hornby around this time also seem to star entitled man-babies. However, his later work seems to include more overt redemptions and, frankly, way better depictions of women, in addition to Hornby becoming known for his extensive charity work. He was apparently going through a divorce around the time this book was written, and had then found a more stable, loving relationship by the time his more optimistic books came out. So, again, this is just me making wild assumptions here, but it kinda looks like maybe this guy was going through some shit, but did a lot of character development of his own afterwards. Just from a writing perspective, I don't have any complaints. I think Hornby is a very talented author, even if his choice of protagonists is a little too terrible for me to handle. Hornby has actually had more than his fair share of movie adaptations of his work. His first novel, an autobiographical story about being a die-hard Arsenal supporter, was turned into a British film in 1997, then an Americanized reimagining of the story was released in 2005 starring Jimmy Fallon. His second book, about a boy, was adapted into a feel-good British rom-com in 2002, starring Hugh Grant and Nicholas Hoult. If you're trying to remember where you know him from, it's probably either Skins or him yelling, "Oh, what a day! What a lovely day!" in Mad Max Fury Road. About a Boy was later adapted into a TV show that was cancelled after 2 seasons. Then there was Slam, A Long Way Down, and Juliet Naked. His books seem to be very adaptation compatible is what I'm trying to say here. But of course, the film we're looking at today is the 2000 movie adaptation of High Fidelity. It was directed by Stephen Frears, a veteran with such films as My Beautiful Laundrette, pick up your ears, Dangerous Liaisons, The Grifters, and The Queen under his belt, in addition to an impressive TV career. It starred John Cusack, Jack Black, Catherine Zeta-Jones, Lisa Bonet, Sarah Gilbert, Lily Taylor, Joan Cusack, and Tim Robbins, and featured an unexpected but amusing cameo from Bruce Springsteen. It seems the screenwriting credit is something of a point of contention. The original draft was written by Scott Rosenberg of Con Air fame, but after years of development delays, the script that was actually used to make the film was written by John Cusack and two of his producing partners. However, Rosenberg still got to keep his name on the box due to a now repealed law that allowed him to take credit for other people's work, simply because he was the first person involved in it. The "I saw it first, therefore it's mine forever" law of screenwriting, I guess. Looking at it just as a film and not an adaptation, from a purely technical, cinematic, and acting talent perspective, it's very good. It's not easy to make an engaging film that involves a character regularly breaking the fourth wall, but this is probably one of the best examples of doing it right. Because apparently everything that Hornby writes needs multiple adaptations, High Fidelity was also turned into a stage musical and rebooted into a Hulu series starring a gender-flip protagonist that only made it through one season before cancellation. Before we start the comparison, there's an obvious difference between the book and the film that I want to mention ahead of the usual assigned place for such things. People who have seen the film and/or anyone with basic knowledge of any of the actors involved will probably have already deduced it as soon as I describe the book. The story is shifted from a UK setting and characters to American. Longtime watchers will know I used to pretend to be offended by this sort of thing, keeping count of exactly how many times it happens in adaptations on general principle, but I think the age of internet critics faking anger for performative reasons is kind of a thing of the past. Quite often it doesn't make a damn bit of difference unless there were some parts of the book that were quintessentially British, which in this case is actually partly true, but as it happens I personally think they were the worst parts of the book anyway. They reminded me of some of the things that I hated the most about living in the UK and directly contributed to me eventually moving to California, so I'm honestly just grateful that Fires didn't make me relive that again. Anyway, the reason I bring it up in advance is it does put a bit of an asterisk next to everything in the Unchanged section. This is the same thing that happened in the book, aside from the fact that it's happening on the other side of the world in a similar but not identical culture now. As an additional qualifier, I also want to mention that I will always consider narration an adaptation cheat, as it proves you couldn't fully transform the written words into visuals, actions, and dialogue. The before-mentioned breaking of the fourth wall that John Cusack partakes of is kind of in a similar ballpark, but it's at least more creative, and as I said, it's pretty hard to pull off, so it probably wasn't an act of adaptation laziness in this case. In fact, I'm given to understand that the inclusion of it was as much an homage to films like ALFIE as it was an attempt to make staying loyal to the book easier. And finally, just a quick warning, there's going to be a lot of vivid descriptions of abusive behavior and an incident of extremely questionable consent, so please keep that in mind if those are subjects you have personal trauma regarding. This is really sodding close to the book, guys. We're talking word for word in places, and certainly scene for scene almost all of the way through. Rob, the douche king of doucheland, getting walked out on by his long-suffering partner Laura, which he claims to himself doesn't bother him because he's had a ton of worse breakups over his life, followed by him giving us a description of his ranked list. The one that only lasted a day before she made out with another boy, the one who he liked as a teen but eventually broke up with because she wasn't ready for sex, only to discover that she immediately slept with a classmate of his, the one that he was super crazy into because she seemed way too cool for him, who eventually ran off with a cooler man, the girl he settled for right after that and who settled for him because they were both recovering from their respective heartbreaks, who ended up also leaving him, which he felt was a violation of the fundaments of their relationship. The depressing little record store he owns, and his two employees, Barry and Dick, who, due to lack of anything else to do, work there full-time despite only being contracted part-time. The three of them going to see Marie, a singer of not major but not inconsequential success, and her subsequent visit to the store. Rob finding out from a mutual that there's an Ian in Laura's life now, and realizing that he was his former upstairs neighbor, which forces Rob to confront the fact that he is bothered by Laura leaving. Thule McGee deciding to track down and reconnect with his top breakup women to figure out why it went wrong with each of them. Finding out numero uno married the second boy she snogged and had erased him from her personal canon, which, after he's done being offended, offended by this and being rude to her mother, actually cheers him up because he decides it must have been fate that it didn't work out with him so she could be with her future husband. The young lady he thought had been frigid with him and then promiscuous with her next lover, turning out to have only done so because she had been so worn down by his constant attempts and heartbroken that Rob had left her for it, she hadn't had the strength to keep fighting off her next date when he started doing exactly the same thing, and the resulting sexual act had traumatized her and made her incapable of sex for the better part of a decade. Rob's only takeaway from this being delight to discover that who took her virginity wasn't a poor reflection on him compared to her next boyfriend, and a reminder that the breakup had been his idea. The woman who had left him despite their relationship being based on having no one better turned out to be miserable now, so that makes him feel good, and the woman he idolized as being the insanely cool chick who got away now comes off as a pretentious poser to him, so he cares significantly less. Laura's father dying, which makes her so emotionally fragile, she decides she'd rather be with Rob than alone, and their relationship actually being somewhat improved from before, as he's willing to do the bare minimum for her, and he makes the very noble decision not to leave her for the first woman to speak to him after she moves back in. And Laura forcing Rob out of his comfort zone and into a less dead-end career. In amongst all these scenes are very book-accurate depictions of Rob stalking, harassing, and verbally abusing Laura as he hyper-obsesses over if she's sleeping with Ian, a possibility that he considers an affair even while he himself is sleeping with Marie. Ian's attempt to get him to stop doing this being treated as his wrongdoing and unfair to Rob. In addition to the main plot, the film is definitely more accurate in the details than average as well. For example, Rob's autobiographical record sorting that he does as a coping mechanism, as music is literally the only other thing he thinks about besides sex and self-pity. I would say that finding out that Rob cheated on Laura while she was pregnant with his child, an act that directly contributed to her deciding to seek an abortion, that he then berated her for in an utterly disingenuous fit of self-righteous rage, and his utter failure to react like a human being to his ex's story of permanent emotional damage and borderline rape are probably the worst acts of his book character that were carried over into the film.
Hey Rob, you fucking asshole!
For myself, and I'm certain many other people, it was more than enough to ensure a complete lack of interest in a happy ending for Rob, regardless of any other events and personal development. On a final, more light-hearted note, there's a book-accurate subplot about Barry joining a band and Rob being terrified that it's going to be so terrible it will ruin a big event for him that's kind of hilarious in hindsight. Jack Black, as a relative unknown, was a perfectly fine casting choice when the film was made. However, for anyone watching it now, the idea of being shocked that the lead singer from Tenacious D has an amazing voice seems quite frankly a bit bizarre. As I hope I've made clear, this adaptation is pretty damn close to the book, but there are never zero changes when a story makes the transition to big screen. So, let's take a look at... A good deal of the divergence from the book seems to be centered around the motivation to make Rob less terrible. Don't misunderstand me, not good, nowhere near the kind of person you'd actually want to know in real life, but better than he was in the book. This was achieved with a combination of things, leaving out the worst of his offences, which we'll come back to, adjusting a few of his conversations so they don't always end with him screaming at a woman until he breaks her spirit and leaves her in a sobbing heap, and making the people around him worse so his awfulness doesn't stand out as much. The mutual friend Liz, one of the few people willing to call Rob out for his rampant misogyny in the book, comes off a tad more petty now, needling him into outbursts that were entirely of his own selfish making before. Rob's mother, a very, very kind and supportive woman in the book, is now nothing short of emotionally abusive, screaming down the phone at Rob for losing what she decided was his last shot at happiness. And done dirtiest of all is Ian. Ian was... well, honestly, he was a bit of a nothing character in the book. He's never directly in the story aside from a single phone call he has with Rob. He was just someone who is decidedly not Rob for Laura to take refuge with for a bit. The film pulls out every conceivable stop to make him as annoying as possible, transforming him into a smug, condescending hipster. They even gave him a ponytail, for goodness sake. That's basically the international visual shorthand for male douchebag. Now, one improvement-orientated change in particular stood out to me, so I'd like to talk about it in a bit more detail. It might seem like quite a minor thing at first, but trust me, it makes a colossal difference to the conclusion of Film Rob's arc compared to the guy in the book. One of the many things that bothered me about the end of the book is all the positive steps that Rob ends up making to improve his life and career are entirely orchestrated by Laura. She not only has all the initial ideas, she arranges the entire thing from start to finish. She approaches Marie about doing a live performance in Rob's store, then she reopens the club he used to work at so he can start DJing again. Rob does nothing but kick and scream and get defensive and grumpy about all of these things every step of the way, until he realizes how beneficial they are and only then leans into them. It, possibly unintentionally, leaves the book with the unfortunate closing message that it's kinda up to women to fix toxic, stagnant men, and I just don't love that. With that in mind, the minor yet major change I mentioned is this. Film Rob also starts his own record label, and, super importantly, he starts it before getting back together with Laura. The initial idea came from a conversation with her, but he chose to actually do it on his own initiative when an opportunity presented itself. There was no dragging involved. She still organizes a big event at his store to help boost its launch, and he bitches about that, but now she's doing it because she's impressed that Mr. Negative decided to actually create something instead of wallowing in decay, not because it's entirely up to her to do everything for him. Don't get me wrong, this sort of thing doesn't even come close to redeeming him or anything, it just shows he has way more potential to improve as a person than the original version of the character, and lessens the before mentioned message that it was somehow Laura's responsibility to sort his life out for him. I also enjoyed that Film Rob wrote one of his little lists about the top things that he loved about Laura. I'm not going to lie, I'm honestly not sure he even liked Laura in the book. He just felt entitled to her. When Laura's father dies, she asks Rob to make love to her to take her mind off it, and while it was arguably taking advantage of someone in emotional distress, the film version of him at least obliged without making a huge deal out of it. I kid you not, Book Rob let her initiate it, then stopped her by pretending that he was concerned she might have picked up an STD from Ian, specifically to hurt her. While she was grieving for her father, he still wanted to punish her emotionally for leaving him. I honestly started hyperventilating at this part in the book. Marie had a more significant role originally. A lot of her scenes were removed altogether, and her part in the ending was reassigned to two film original shoplifting skater boys with surprising musical talent. I'm not entirely sure what this change was in aid of, aside from keeping Marie a relatively drama-free character. She saunters in, gets some John Cusack dong, and moseys off into the sunset, never to be seen again. Lisa Bonet almost appears to be playing herself, a definitely too cool to be dragged into your bullshite flower child. Oh, also fun fact, her daughter Zoe Kravitz played Rob in the 2020 reboot. Once again ending the section on a Jack Black related observation, I'm not sure if it's due to the man's inescapable charm, the fact that I find American douchebags less annoying than British douchebags due to less personal exposure, or the fact that he spent slightly less time bullying Dick, but I thought that Barry was a lot more bearable in the film as well.
I swear to God, if you tore this thing, it's vintage, and I will fucking sock your nose. You'll pay big.
As part of their mission to de-terrible Rob a bit, the film omits one of the women on his list. It's a little complicated, but what it basically boils down to is she was the long-term girlfriend of his best friend, who he ended up banging behind his back. After successfully splitting them up, he realized he didn't actually give a shit about her, and the entire thing had just been part of a subconscious need to ruin other people's happiness. After less than a month, she had gone back to her ex, and he was ostracized from that particular friend group. Okay, I'm not sure how to say this, but British Rob seemed to have a serious low-key issue with Americans, despite the fact that he was sleeping with one for a good percentage of the book. His very first thought about Marie was she was pretty in that cross-eyed American way, and he continues to take offhand jabs at Americans all the way through the story. There doesn't really appear to be any particular reason for it, aside from the fact that he's just an arse about everyone and everything. A scene that was filmed but cut out of the final product involves a bait-and-switch moment early on in the book that looks like it's shaping up to prove that Rob has a shred of humanity in him deep down, but of course turned out to be yet more evidence of him being an absolute wanker. He's invited to the home of a snobbish middle-aged woman to look at a private record collection that she's selling, and it turns out to be the most incredible collection he's ever seen in his life. The Beatles original white labels or something like that. I don't really understand music terms, I'm sorry. It turns out it belongs to her ex-husband, who's fallen on hard times after he ran away with a younger woman. One of their daughter's friends, to be precise. Yikes. This new contender for Arse of the Year quickly fell on hard times and, in a pretty fecking cheeky move, asked his ex to sell his records for him and pass on the money, apparently forgetting that his former old lady is a boss bitch, and as a result she's offering to sell this priceless record collection to Rob for 50 quid just to spite the buttwipe. Rob can't quite bring himself to be a part of it and passes up on this once-in-a-lifetime opportunity to buy a fortune's worth of music for basically nothing. And you might be thinking, wow, he's got principles or a conscience, but no. No. The smeghead just relates to the music snob who cheated on her so hard he can't bring himself to screw him over. Rob's general terribleness, both in personality and ability to perform basic tasks as an adult, leads him to having the worst birthday party ever, with a tiny amount of people he doesn't really like and who don't really like each other. It was honestly one of the most depressing things I have ever read. Final thoughts. All in all, I would say this is a noteworthy example of how to stay very true to a source material while using tiny but very cleverly chosen changes and omissions to vastly improve some of its harder to like parts. It also shows how the presentation of the same plot beats and the same dialogue, with over-the-top acting and a carefully chosen tone, can lean a film much harder into the comedy part of a dark comedy. So yeah, this is something of a triumph of adaptation. Huzzah! Give this film the Dominic Noble Medal of Achievement and throw it a sexy party. The film is definitely the version of the story that I would recommend if I had to choose between them, but I can't pretend that I think anyone really needs to experience either. I understand the appeal of the kind of humour that can come from a cartoonishly irredeemable character, and I don't think there's any chance of someone looking at the even relatively improved Rob of the film and thinking, ah yes, this is the life I would like for myself. I too shall behave like a garbage person to everyone around me. It's just that in this case, even though it's played to a comedic extreme, shit is just too real here. As a society, British, American, and all of the societies, we haven't really addressed a lot of the issues that are played for laughs in this story. Not in the year 2000 when this came out, and not now, 21 years later. Men feeling zero guilt and facing zero repercussions for casually destroying women's lives and leaving them with crippling trauma is just not funny to me, because I have seen the aftermath of it again and again and again. So I will not judge you if you like this book or film, but I will not give either my personal recommendation. I believe I have the right to do or not do that much. Thank you for joining me, my beautiful watchers. My analytics showed that 90% of my audience click away at this point in the video and miss the custom music that I commissioned for the end credits, so I'm shamelessly using an adorable kitty to keep you hypnotized into staying through my end spiel. If you enjoyed this adaptation review, don't forget to help my channel avoid a terrible fate at the hands of the unforgiving YouTube algorithm by leaving a like and maybe throwing in a comment about how damn good my nails look. Hollow taco, by the way. I'll switch cats because Wisp was getting impatient. If you're new here, consider subscribing so you can find your way back through the dark shadow cast by YouTube's oversaturation, and click the notification bell because, fun fact, if you don't, YouTube may not bother showing you when I post new things, as it straight up hates its creators. And don't forget to check out the existing backlog of videos. Check out my Patreon page if you're interested in extra content and rewards. Please take care of yourselves out there in these dangerous pandemic times that I desperately hope are nearly over, and I will see you soon.
I guess the protagonist is better, a little better than the book. He's still a bit of a... Yes, the protagonist is better, if you don't take too close a look. He's marginally better than the book, still a bit of a prick.
Much love and appreciation to my patrons of honour, Shelby Hote, Satel Spurtloff, and Kat Harker. Shout out to Ilnej for performing this awesome tune, check out his channel for more parody and original songs, and a huge thank you to this video's co-producer, Kate Robinson. She does some really amazing work on her channel that I think you would really enjoy, so be sure to check that out too. A spot on the Empire. The Death Star put out a magazine rating the 500 greatest movies. His partner of the last few years. Bobbing my head like a fucking vulture or whatever. Excuse me, Sir Terry, this was not an invitation to dig your claws into my leg. Hello?